Before getting to the stories, just wanted to point out that this video is quite different than what we typically post, which consists mainly of horror stories from films. But having scoured through some of the content in the paranormal side of Reddit, I came across the true paranormal experiences section of it, where there was experiences actually from real people. Some of these stories were actually submitted to us after requesting them on Reddit, so shout out to those users. Many of which have plenty of detail and not only make for a good read, but are also sure to invoke a sense of dread for those who are into things like real paranormal encounter stories. So if you do enjoy this style of content, then please do let me know in the comments. Oh, and if you are new, then be sure to give this video a thumbs up so we can spook more people with our stories. I had a strange incident when I was a child during the 1990s. My cousins came over one night, and it was summer, and brought a Ouija board along with them for us to mess with. My cousin made us dim the light and got us to touch the moving piece as she started asking if anyone was there and if they were good or malevolent. Now this story was submitted by NoPrune2859, and it goes on to say that the piece was slowly moving, but I assumed it was just a cousin messing with us. I eventually let go and got up for some reason, and I began slowly backing up against the table. Then my elbow hit a can of soda that was on the table, and it fell and spilled on the carpet below. As I picked up the can, one of my cousins suddenly gasped and turned on the light. The soda spill was in a perfect shape of a heart. We just stood there shocked, and I got spooked and asked to put the board game away. They went home and left their board game with us, and the next night I was home alone. My sister was in gymnastics practice, and my parents went to go get her. I was watching TV when I heard a sound upstairs. Our house had an attic that my parents remodeled into bedrooms and a bathroom. One of our doors started creaking, and I heard actual footsteps walking around up there. There was no one home besides me. My heart suddenly sank, and I felt dread and even cold suddenly. I locked myself in the bathroom and called my parents, asking how far away they were. I think I got real scared, and I just decided to wait for them outside. When they returned, I couldn't for the life of me remember why I didn't tell them why I was afraid. Once we went inside, I looked around our attic and discovered my closet door was open. I then remembered about the Ouija board game that my cousins left here. I took the board game and I put it in a large trash bag and threw it out. I never had an incident like that occur in my life again, and never messed with those Ouija board games ever again. And anytime I see one at the store, my mind always goes back to that summer and what exactly I experienced. Has anyone else ever had something like that happen? Leave your answer in the comments. This next story was submitted by itsrosaA. My family have always been strong believers in the paranormal, which is why for the majority of my childhood I was the odd one out. I never believed any of their encounters. I just took them all as silly stories they told me. The most ridiculous tale my parents, in fact, had told me was how when I was 3, they found me at midnight, sat at the top of the staircase talking to the ceiling. And apparently I was speaking to my great aunt who they found out had passed away at 11 p.m. Anyways, when I was 17, I started working at a nursery as an apprentice in September. Now, the building was originally an orphanage for boys from back in 1800. It got shut down after World War II and was bought by the nursery owner in 1975. When I first joined, my coworkers would be telling me about how the place was haunted and all the typical stories you hear about the haunted places, those footsteps in rooms that are empty, seeing figures in the corner of the eye, etc., etc. I would just roll my eyes or play along with them, and I hadn't experienced anything for 3 whole months. My first encounter happened a week before Christmas. The nursery had shut early, and the staff had to stay back to take down the decorations. I was in the baby room by myself on a ladder, taking down the dangling snowflakes from the ceiling. I heard light footsteps coming up the stairs in the hallway, and assumed that the manager's daughter, who was also 3, was coming up to use the bathroom. I didn't hear anything more for another 10 or so minutes. Then I heard the baby room door open, and a few small footsteps entering the room. I saw a small figure out the corner of my eye. I said, "I've got a few more snowflakes to take down if you want to help," and was coming down the ladder. But when I turned around, there was nobody there. Just myself, the baby door, wide open. I even checked the hallway. It weirded me out a little bit, but I just assumed she had come in and walked out without me hearing. But when I went to ask the manager a little while later, she told me her daughter had gone home with her dad an hour earlier. And that made me feel a weird tingling down my spine, but I just clued it up to me being tired. My next encounter would be a week after returning back from Christmas. I was covering in the preschool room, and we were leading a group of 15 in a line through the downstairs corridor to the garden outside. As they were walking, I noticed the little boy suddenly run into one of the side playing rooms. I called out and went after them. When I stepped into the room and looked, it was completely empty. I panicked, thinking that they had hidden. But when I turned around to let one of my coworkers know, they were looking at me weirdly, even some of the kids. I explained what had happened and they just said nobody had run off and everyone was still there. All 15 children. That proper freaked me out. And from then, a whole string of events occurred which has now made me feel like I'm a full believer. The amount of incidents would lead me to write a whole book, but here's a short list. A lot more incidents of the little boy running from the line, always to the same room, at least 5 times. I ignored it after the second time. Small footsteps along the corridors and the stairs, with nobody there when checking. Was talking to a little girl in the toddler room when I felt someone tug the back of my shirt. Nobody was there when I turned around. This happened several more times afterwards. A few times I've noticed that the babies and the toddlers just staring at the room door, some even giggling or waving at it. The only elements I didn't get was the sound of the child laughter, which a few of my old coworkers had heard, and quite frankly I'm glad I didn't and was relieved when my apprenticeship came to an end. Since being at the nursery, I don't know if some form of energy has clung to me or now that I'm a believer, I'm being made more aware. But I've been experiencing more encounters since, which I'll likely make a post about soon. This story was submitted by Cug Darter. When I was young, I lived in an apartment above a mechanic shop. Periodically throughout the year, there would be a loud knock on the front door in the middle of the night, without anyone ever being at the door. You'd be able to hear if someone was running down the stairs playing games, but there was never anyone there, just a loud knock, knock, knock that woke everyone up in the middle of the night. In another apartment my family lived in there was a previous renter who fell down the stairs and passed. We did not know until neighbors told us after 2 years of living there, but both my brother and I would always talk before about how we felt a strange presence in that hallway and would both run up the stairs whenever we came home because of the eerie feeling that we had. In that same apartment on 2 occasions, my stepdad was awoken from his sleep by a black face entity that he said was trying to take his breath from him and that looked like it was a black shadow figure of Medusa. There was also several occasions of knickknacks moving themselves from shelves. There was definitely a presence in there in that apartment. My brother's ex-girlfriend was playing with the Ouija board on the night before Halloween. They conjured a spirit that warned them they would burn. That same night, their house burned down and 2 people died. Another story that happened with me was when my brother and I shared the same dream of being abducted by aliens while we were at our cousin's house. We both described a thick fog that surrounded the house that was hovering over the lake in the backyard. The next thing we remembered was the room being filled with white light. We both hid under the futon in the living room as the front door opened and a gray alien walked inside in a black rubber suit. We did not share this with each other until we started talking about UFOs with a couple of his friends. When we both realized we had the same memory, we both became so bugged out that we became speechless, and my brother did not believe me. He started to cry after I told him the details of the fog and the cloud. Did we get abducted? I will never know, but the shared memory seems too specific to be a coincidence. This story was submitted by Anonymous. Years ago, my wife and I were in our sunroom watching TV one evening. I decided to go to our bedroom to watch another TV show on a TV there. I had left the bedroom door open about 2 inches. As a commercial came on, I shifted my gaze to the door, just not wanting to watch the ad. Then I saw a figure walk past the door toward another door leading to the washer-dryer, and I thought my wife was going to come to bed, but before that checked to see if the garage was closed for the night. That or put some clothes in the dryer. After a few minutes or so, she didn't come back. I didn't hear the garage door close, and I didn't hear the clothes dryer start up either. So I got up and found her still in the sunroom watching TV. I asked her if she had left that room any time in the last few minutes. She said no. So I told her I saw someone walk past the bedroom door just a few minutes ago. She said she did go to the kitchen about 30 minutes ago, but the kitchen is in the opposite direction. So she then tells me that she had been thinking someone was in our house as she kept looking toward the other end of our house, thinking there might be someone in that direction. Then I realized she was wearing her pink robe. What I saw was black and white, so I'm left to believe I may have seen a spirit. Her suspicion of someone in our house was totally independent of my experience, but substantiated the possibility of a spirit. On another occasion, after the violent passing of my twin brother, I was watching TV in yet another room, and that was the living room. As I was watching TV, which was just left of the fireplace, my eyes were drawn to the wall to the right of the fireplace. There, I saw the silhouette of what I took to be the shoulders and head of a man, and as I watched it, it moved from right to left across the wall until it reached a hallway where it disappeared. I had been laying on the sofa, thought it was a shadow of someone in my house and maybe created by light in that room behind me, creating a shadow. I jumped up, turned around to see who was in my house, my fists at the ready, but no one was there. That's when the hair on my arms and the back of my neck seemed to stand. That scared me crazy. Both of these events actually happened after the car crash of my brother. Also, he was a realtor and once used our house as his office before we owned it. This next story was submitted by koopaphil. I have family in Ireland and they own a bed and breakfast as well as several other businesses. One trip we took out to visit them, the bed and breakfast was booked up, so they put us up in rooms and they had the dress shop next door. And the room I was in had been of a great aunt's of mine, I believe, and it had a bed, a dresser, and an old flat iron in it. The room to the door would not latch closed and always stayed open about a meter or so. I didn't think too much of it until I was getting into bed for the night. Across the hall was a linen closet whose door also would not stay closed. I swear I could feel something watching me from in there. I tried wedging the flat iron against the door of my room, but the door just pushed it aside and assumed its normal position, partially open. I gave up and had an uneasy night's sleep. The next morning, I asked my cousins if there was another room available and made excuses about the bed being uncomfortable. They said there was another room on the 3rd floor. My cousin Peter had used it for a time and it had a daybed in it. I moved my stuff up there, and that night I happily settled in. The door even closed properly and I had a good night's sleep. Right up until the knocking started, anyway. I woke up just before dawn and I could see a sliver of light on the horizon out the window, accompanied by an insistent knocking sound. I figured it was my cousins rousing me up to help me pick up supplies for their restaurant and groggily opened the door. There was no one there. Listening, it seemed like the knocking was coming in from the wall that adjoined the bed and breakfast. I figured my cousins were pranking me, so I loudly announced I knew it was them and that I wasn't afraid. The knocking sound then moved across the wall, along the outside wall of the room, over the window, and then to the opposite wall of the room. I was now thoroughly freaked out. After a minute, I calmed down enough to try communicating with whatever was making this noise. I asked it to knock once for yes and twice for no, and tried asking various questions. It never answered, but the knocking did change intensity and position a few times. As the dawn grew brighter, the knocking slowly faded and then stopped completely. So I moved my stuff all back downstairs and slept in the room with the watcher. At least it was quiet. This next story was posted by Nervous Produce 244. My house in Amman, Jordan, is very haunted. Since the day we moved in, which was about 18 to 19 years ago, there has been so much activity. There are multiple instances, and I will be talking about a couple. The shadow people. When I was little, I was sleeping next to my mom because my dad was away for work. I usually woke up around 7 or 8 a.m., but on that day I woke up at 5:30 or 6 a.m. I'd say. When I woke up, I looked to my left towards the side my mom was sleeping on, and I saw this figure of a shadow person. He had no face, but I could see the area where his mouth would be moving. I don't exactly remember how it was, but I know it was very odd because obviously the figure had no mouth, but it felt like a mask was over their face. When I looked at him, he was standing so close to my mom as if he was whispering something to her. That's until he noticed I woke up and I was looking at him. As soon as he noticed me, he looked at me, then quickly turned around and started moving inhumanely fast towards the door. It was so scary, yet I wasn't scared. It was more curious than scared because I ran after him, and when I reached the living room outside my mom's bedroom, we were on the second floor. The abat-jours, which are some types of curtains we have in the Middle East, were open. The thing is, we only opened them when we woke up, and nobody was awake at 6 a.m. Also, they're loud when they're open, so I would have heard him opening them. When I got to the living room, he was gone, but they were all opened. Never saw him again, but I still remember it so well. The second instance is the entities that are awake at night. I believe when we go to sleep, they wake up and start living their lives because usually around 3 a.m., we hear footsteps going up and down the stairs. We hear them calling out our names, them peeking through our, as in my sister and I's, slightly open door. Sometimes my sister would wake up with a bite mark or even a bruise. My grandma saw the same woman twice in the basement floor. We have a room down there. She would walk into her room, then outside in the main area where we had our closets. The layout of the closet is very weird, just don't ask. My cousin heard my mom calling out my sister's name at 4 a.m. When she asked her the next day about it, she told her she was passed out and fast asleep at the time, and she didn't call for my sister at all that night. We lived there for a few years, but then moved to Canada when I was 11. That was basically the last time I was there, and I turned 18 and went back to Jordan for a layover. Usually when we go to Jordan, I would stay at my grandma's house, but since it was a layover, my sister and I thought it would be fine to stay there for just one night. And keep in mind, we were scared out of our minds because that house traumatized us as kids. Anyways, we go straight to the basement, and our dad renovated the house, mind you, because it was falling apart before, and he kindly added an elevator that leads straight to the basement for my grandma because she couldn't go down the stairs since her leg was broken. So we go right up from my front door to the basement using the elevator, and we basically did not enter the upstairs area at all. While we were downstairs together, nothing really happened. My sister decided to go to sleep at 2 a.m., but I was still jet-lagged and watching, so you know damn well I stayed up to watch it. The second it hit 3 a.m. is when it started going down. I was peacefully vibing, chilling, watching my show when I heard this loud bang upstairs. Now, of course, my fight or flight instinct kicked in and I obviously flew into my sister's bedroom. I ran as fast as humanly possible because I heard a door slam so hard as if they were mad at us and we weren't welcome. There were no windows open, there were no doors open because we never went upstairs. I've never felt more scared in my life because it sounded like they legit broke the door with how hard they slammed it shut. I calmed down a bit. I went to use the bathroom. I finished washing my hands. I turned off the tap and went to sleep. My sister wakes me up an hour later telling me to go turn off the tap. So I look at her in shock like, I turned it off just a while ago. What? Of course, she couldn't sleep after that, so she ended up packing our bags quickly and we dipped. I never really went back after that, but I did have a dream about the house that I still remember very vividly. It was about this little girl who was wearing a dress and one of those French painter hats. She had bangs and a short bob. She looked very cute. She led me upstairs to where our bedrooms are, and that's where I saw an old man staring outside the window. I remember when I looked at him, I became so creeped out and scared. Then I went into my room to look around, but nothing really happened. That's until I look to my right at my parents' bedroom and see a bunch of mannequins that were headless, armless, legless, some of which had clothes on and some of which didn't. The little girl and old man were circling around them, just walking around them. It was very scary, to be honest. This next story is submitted by RedRust92. I had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night when I was just 6 years old. I shared a room with my older sister and we slept on the same bed. There was also the family computer in our room, so my mom would sometimes stay up late chatting with her friends, and these were her friends from back home. She's from Turkey. One night I randomly woke up and looked over to see what appeared to be a completely blacked out version of my mom sitting on the computer chair. She was pitch black, even though we had a bright light on in the hallway and the door wide open. The computer was only about 3 feet away from the bed. She was wearing her usual outfit and sitting in her characteristic pose, legs crossed with her hands resting in front of her knees. She was staring out the window, her face and body parallel to mine. I asked, "Mom, what are you doing?" No answer. "Mom, Mom." Then, whatever it was, slowly turned its head to look at me. It had no facial features, just a black shadow. It stared directly at me. I got so creeped out that I hid under the covers, turned my back to it, and hugged my sister tightly. I remember hearing some kind of growling or noise coming from outside the window, maybe like a cat. I was absolutely terrified, but I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I asked my mom why she'd been in our room, and she denied ever being there. My mom isn't the type of person to scare us or play pranks like that. No drinking, no drugs, nothing like that. Which is why the story still haunts me to this day. Story submitted by passiePandaR. My partner and I lived in our apartment for about a year and a half after moving from out of state. After about 6 months, we began experiencing minor paranormal activity. Footsteps, doors opening, closing on their own. We were okay with that because, other than that, the presence seemed benevolent. Things began to escalate this month, however, and I began having weird dreams of being watched by something. And one night, I saw a head outside our bedroom window. It ducked out of sight. I screamed in terror. The thing is, our window and apartment is on the second floor with no ledges, stairs, or anything outside of it. Just a long drop to the ground. A few nights ago, I woke up to tapping on my partner's studio window. Same setup as our bedroom. It was a rhythmic tapping with 6 taps consecutively and pauses in between. This was at 3:30 a.m. and my partner and I were wide awake. It continued for an hour, then stopped. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a loud growl mixed with what I can only describe as gremlin gibberish, like Taz from Looney Tunes, but angry. We froze, then stayed up for the rest of the night. We saged the apartment with white sage and dragon's blood, which apparently temporarily calms the activity, but we've noticed that it begins to slowly build back up after about a month or two. We have 2 cats. Our cats, they aren't very vocal, but one has been extremely more vocal in the past month leading up to this. Once we saged the apartment, he went completely back to normal. Does anyone know what this spirit might want, and should we sage more often? We're moving next year and are worried about it following us. This next story is by Initial Summer 4032 and is called Seeing Ghosts Changed Me. I had my first paranormal experience in 2010 when I moved into a 1-story apartment. Following a divorce, I moved to my hometown about 30 minutes away and found the cutest 2-bedroom apartment. It was single-story and connected to 2 other units. I was so happy to be closer to my family in the small town I grew up in, and my closest friends lived there too. I first noticed strange things happening about a month in, when I heard heavy footsteps coming from the ceiling. The attic had no real flooring, just insulation, so it didn't make sense that a person could walk across from one side of the house to the other. I called my 19-year-old brother to come over and look into the attic. as I was sure an animal was probably the culprit. He pulled the attic door down that was located in the hallway and checked. No critters or evidence of nests were found. Days later, I woke up around 2 a.m. to sounds of kids outside. I got up and stood in front of the open bedroom window and watched 4 children playing hide and seek in the backyard. They were solid, not see-through, and all 4 had on white pajamas, which struck me as odd. 2 girls and 2 boys, appearing no older than 5 or 6 years old, ran around, laughing and talking to each other for what seemed like 10 minutes. One boy hid behind an oak tree counting, while 3 other kids ran and hid. I assumed the elderly neighbor may have been babysitting his grandchildren and fell asleep, so they snuck outside to play. I later found out that he had no grandchildren and none of the neighbors had kids at that age. I didn't know what to think, and meanwhile, I would have terrible nightmares and hear strange noises at random times. Everything from doors closing to objects falling off shelves, and I was convinced that the landlord was remodeling the middle unit at 10 p.m. one night while I was watching TV, but I looked outside to see no lights on next door, and the parking lot was empty. I could smell random cigars on occasion, and my TV would change channels or turn on by itself sometimes. It never happened after I moved out, neither did the waking up in the morning to my comforter and blanket being on the floor, which happened almost daily. One night I couldn't get warm in bed, even wearing a hoodie, sweatpants, and even socks. I froze as I lay there listening to my trinkets move around on the dresser. I had the heat up, but it still felt like I was sleeping outside in the cold. I frequently called my friends or family members when I heard or saw something weird and wanted them to stay over. Some witnessed the craziness, so I felt relieved that I wasn't imagining it, as there was so much more that happened at that place, and someday I want to write about it. It changed a lot in me, like my views on the spiritual realm. I sought out information on energy and the paranormal. My beliefs changed after living with that experience, and I believe to my core that there is way more to this existence than we know. I believe in the afterlife and that we are all spirits having a human experience. Once our lives are over, we shed the meat suits, but our souls are eternal, hopefully not hanging out and scaring the living. This next story was posted by Business Body, and it's titled Skeptic to Believer. So I will start by saying that this was my first post on Reddit. I want to share something that was experienced by myself and my coworker while working third shift a few weeks ago. I haven't stopped thinking about it, and the few people I've told, I can tell just really don't believe me. I've been following this sub since, and the sub he's talking about is /paranormal, and feel the urge to share my experience. I can't disclose the exact location of where this happened, but I will tell you that it was somewhere where multiple people had been found deceased as a result of a natural disaster that occurred just a few days prior. My coworker and I were sitting outside around 4 a.m. eating a snack. We were the only ones on the property, no business for anyone else to be there, and it was very dark, the only light coming from the moon. Out of nowhere, we hear very loud singing, clearly a female. It is hard to describe, but the best way I know how is it was happy, confident, and kind of like how it sounds when someone hums or sings in the shower. We both looked at each other as if to confirm the other person had heard it. The look on my coworker's face confirmed he did as well. We stand up, and I was reaching for my flashlight when I saw a figure appearing to be walking right by us, about 10 yards away. Again, hard to explain, but just imagine seeing someone in the dark. It's really more of a silhouette. When I turned on my flashlight, there was no one, and the singing had stopped. We were both dumbfounded. We searched everywhere and called out, but nothing. A few nights later, at the same place, my coworker and I were inside a vehicle when we had heard several drops of water fall on his arm. He looked at me and said, "Where did that come from?" The windows were rolled up and neither of us were drinking anything. Because of what happened prior, I looked this up and found out that it's a phenomenon that many have reported as paranormal. Skeptics would say that there has to be an explanation. I would have said the same thing, except that I was there and I saw 4 or 5 fat droplets on his arm that appeared from nowhere. I was never a believer in anything paranormal, but these things happened and I feel differently. I don't know why or how, but I know for some there's some sort of in-between after they pass away. If you enjoyed these stories and this style of storytelling, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button and stay tuned for more stories like this. Leave a comment down below. What do you think of paranormal encounters? Do you think any of these have legitimacy? And have you ever experienced anything paranormal? Maybe you could be featured in one of our upcoming videos, if so.